This is my 1976 MG Midget. I've converted it to EV. It has a 150-mile range, and I've done it for under $4,000. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through the design of the EV system, the full story of the build and all the issues I came up with, how I solved them, all the hoops I had to jump through, and finally, I'll give a detailed breakdown on the cost of every single component. I want to be really transparent and say exactly how much this cost. I know a ton of people will show you a build that's super expensive and you know it's expensive, they won't ever say how much it costs them, or they will be really vague on details. I just want to be fully transparent and show people that this can be done for a low cost. But first, I have to go through some pre-rebuttals of what the naysayers are going to say immediately. So first, you ruined it. I got this car with no engine in it. It didn't even run. Now it runs. It's on the road. It's putting a smile on my face and everyone else who sees it. Also, now that this is EV, it's actually way more reliable than the original car was. All MG owners watching know these things break down all the time and they're not reliable. There's no more pesky mechanical bits in the engine, in the transmission, in the carburetor. This just works now. It's simple as can be. Second, why would you do this? Well, I'm a mechanical engineer and I like projects and I want to learn more electrical stuff. So this was an awesome electrical engineering project where I've learned so much on this. I essentially got to go to school for free. Third, this is a classic car. You just destroyed its value. Why would you do that? I would argue this isn't a classic car. This is a vintage car. I picked this car up for $2,000. It's not a classic car if it's that cheap. You will find these all over the place running in their stock gas form for $3,000 and less. So this is a perfect platform to do something like this. Fourth, I can fill mine up in 5 minutes with gas. You have to wait 24 hours to charge it. Sure, this takes longer to charge. I'm willing to bet 98% of people who own old cars like this are never driving far enough in 24 hours to need to even refill their gas tank. For my use, I'm just driving this around town. It's a fun car. I never have a problem with having to charge it. So now I'm gonna run through the design of the car. So first and most important is the battery. I have 6 Tesla Model S modules in series. They're each about 25 volts, so it's 150 volts total. I have 2 of them right here in this battery box and 4 in the trunk. I'll go show you the trunk now. Here's 4 all stacked in series in the trunk. So yes, I've lost all my trunk space. That's something I knew going into this project. And the series connections for the trunk battery to the front battery run through the cab. I've actually routed them through the original heater ducts. So in total I have 6 modules in series. It's roughly 150 volts, 200 amp hours. That's about 30 kilowatt hours total. And that gives anywhere from 100 to 150 miles of range, depending on the driving conditions and the temperatures. The motor. This is the motor down here. This is a Warp 9 DC series wound motor. It's pretty old school for EV conversions, but it has a good amount of power and a good amount of torque. The original gas motor had 65 horsepower peak. This EV motor has 34 horsepower peak. It's a lot less horsepower, so it can't reach the same top speed. But the gas motor had 82 foot-pounds of torque. This motor has 100 foot-pounds of torque. So with the higher torque and having that torque available at 0 RPM, this car drives much better in the city at slower speeds than the original gas car did. It definitely outperforms it, and it works perfectly for my needs, which are mainly city driving. I don't care about the highway top speed that much. And to be frank, it's scary to be going those speeds on the highway, and I avoid it as much as I can. Difficult to see, but it still does have the original manual transmission in there. So it's EV, but it's still manual, which is one of the coolest things about this car. I have the shifter here. There is no clutch, so it's kind of hard to shift while moving. It's possible, but with the power and torque that this car has, I can take off just fine in 4th gear from a stop, and it's like driving an automatic car. 3rd gear is fun to have a little more pep in the city. 1st and 2nd are honestly too much torque, and it's a really jerky ride. But it's fun to have the manual transmission to shift gears if you want to, and since it has enough torque, you can drive it without shifting, and that's what's really cool about this, is anyone can drive it. A lot of the old classic cars, not everyone can drive them because they're nervous and scared to use a manual transmission. This is simple as can be. This box down here is my controller. It converts the battery voltage input and outputs voltage to the motor to run it to speed accordingly. This here is my charger. I charge up here with the standard J1772 socket, and the charger charges only at about 2 kilowatts. It's a pretty slow charger, but for my needs it works just fine. I could easily get a charger that could charge much faster, but that would probably be $500 to $1,000, and I don't care that much. This works well enough for what I use it for. This is the BMS. This monitors all the temperatures and voltages of every battery cell, and if anything is too high, too low, too hot, too cold, this will cut the connection from the input and output and make it so that I can't get any power to the motor. It also monitors while charging to stop when I'm fully charged. This is the DC-DC converter. This is essentially like the alternator of the car. It takes the high voltage DC from the battery and converts it down to 12 volts so that I can run all my electronics. I do have a lead acid 12 volt battery in parallel here. That is in case if this ever breaks or has any issues, I still have 12 volt power to run my lights and be able to turn my key so I'm not completely stranded. This is just a fuse box that runs to all the accessory 12 volt things I've added in the EV conversion. And all of the original 12 volt lights work on this system. The tail lights, the reverse lights, the license plate lights, headlights, turn signals, and the horn is all original. Here in the cockpit, I changed a few things. I took out the speedometer because it didn't work at all, and I added a GPS speedometer. I added a 12 volt battery monitor, and I took out the tachometer because it wouldn't work well anymore with the engine out. This box here is a motor temperature sensor. These are my lights that I can use to control my running lights, headlights, my main 12 volt battery. And this screen down here gives me a readout of my battery percentage and every individual cell voltage. I do have a main cutoff switch here for safety. This little box is an aftermarket Bluetooth module that I've added for my speakers. My speakers are inside here behind the seats, and it hooks up to my phone. It's pretty cool to have modern solutions in a 50-year-old car. And that is just about it. It is pretty simple. I know there's a lot of wiring, but it's actually not that complex at all. I've never done anything like this before, and the wiring all just made sense to me, and it works. Another nice thing about using this as the host car is the steering is manual steering and the brakes are manual, so I did not have to come up with any sort of power steering, any sort of electric power steering or electric brake solution. That stuff was simple. I just left it be and it works. Another naysaying comment I always get is people always assume, oh, I added 500 pounds to it and it's super heavy now. In one of my other videos you can watch, I weighed it. It only weighs 50 pounds more than stock, and it has the exact same front to rear weight distribution that the car originally had. So I'm pretty happy with the handling overall. And the center of gravity might not be the greatest with 200 pounds of battery back here stacked up this high. If I wanted to, I could cut a hole in the floor here and probably drop this down 8 inches level with where the original gas tank was. But that's a lot of effort, and I don't want to be cutting into the chassis of this car. This has been a pretty minimal modifications. All I've done is drill a few holes here and there for rib nuts to mount things. There's been no major cutting that's going on in the front end here. It is a reversible build. You could put the gas engine back in if you wanted to. And some of the last things I want to do to this car are these seats are old and cracking in a few places on the shoulder and on the seat pan. I don't know yet if I'm going to re-upholster these these are also hard as a rock. I think another fun project would be BMW i3. Seats are pretty small and narrow. They might fit in here. It would be cool to have a new modern seat in this car that's more comfortable, rather than spending $400 to $500 on reupholstering seats. If anyone else has gone through that process or has any suggestions, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear what your experience was. Now I'm going to go through the whole build process. From start to finish, it was just over 2 years, but that's with a lot of being lazy in between getting married. I was able to drive the car home when I originally bought it. If I were to do it again, I could probably get it done in 5 miles. Dedicated. I'm guessing the range was something like 50 to 20 miles fully charged. It was an unfinished EV project. It ran and drove, but barely. It had a 9-inch ADC motor in the front, and in the trunk there were 2 Chevy Volt modules unsecured just sitting there. There was no BMS monitoring cell voltage or cell temperature. There was also a loose charger sitting in the back. The brakes were completely shot. Shortly after buying it, I probably let it sit a little too long, and the batteries completely died, so I had to find a new source for batteries. I found someone locally who had Tesla Model S modules that they were using for an off-grid solar project. They had just gotten their house hooked up to the grid, so I bought all these Tesla modules and a BMS to control them. Then I went and individually tested each module because they had an unknown history and I wanted to be sure that the modules were good. I'm glad I did this because I found one module was bad, and I sourced another single module locally to replace that bad module. I then made a battery box for the front of the car and a battery box for the rear. Then once both battery boxes were installed, I started running electronics more to my liking. And I installed a lot of low voltage wiring to interact with my screen and a lot of the original 12-volt wiring system. Then a major milestone was hooking all that up. I finally got the motor spinning and went for a few fun test drives. I found out it is more energy efficient than a Tesla Model 3 at about 5 miles per kilowatt hour. With everything installed in the car, I then weighed it and found the front rear weight is distributed exactly the same as the original car, and it's only 50 pounds heavier than stock. Then I replaced the master cylinder, which was the issue for the brakes not working well, and decided it was time for a top speed run. Speedometer's at like 73, 74. I'm starting to smell like a hair dryer smell. I think that's maxed out. Yeah, I don't have motor power. Oh shoot. Something sounds clanky and rattly. So I am just coasting. Yeah, it sounds really bad. Oh, no. Yep. Something is destroyed in the transmission. We'll figure that out. I got the car up to about 73 miles an hour, and the original ADC motor that was in the car completely fried and blew up. Then I sourced a new motor locally. It was also a 9-inch DC motor. This time it's a Warp 9, and I fit that up into the car and got back on the road again. And for the finishing touches, I replaced all of the 50-year-old rubber body seals all over the car to make it look a lot nicer. And now it's registered, insured, and road legal, getting miles every day. I estimate my range is about 150 miles driving in the city. Driving any faster than that, the range dips down to about 100 miles. Same thing with cold weather, dips down the range a little bit too. And some final things I'd like to do are get the seats reupholstered. And in the heat of the summer here, the batteries sometimes hit the 40C limit, and I might need to install some sort of cooling system to be able to drive this car all the time in the summer without any overheating issues. Now for the summary of the entire cost of this project. I kept track of every single thing that I purchased on this. First of all, to make sure that things don't get out of control and I know how much I've spent on it. And second of all, so I can do a report at the end of the project like this and not get called a liar. So first, I bought the car for $2,000, but it was already EV. So I'm going to split half of that, $1,000 for the car and $1,000 for some of the EV components, which I think is fair because in the original car, the batteries ended up dying, the motor ended up failing. So really all I was left with was a controller and a charger. So $1,000 for the EV components of the car. The Tesla batteries and the BMS, that cost me $1,800. I spent $350 on the battery box hardware, getting the sheets of mica for insulation, the ACM material for the box walls itself, all the screws and bolts and brackets to mount everything. I spent $120 on the DC to DC converter. I spent $175 on the HV cabling running from the rear battery box to the front and the motor and controller and BMS. Then for miscellaneous cables and connectors and fuses, I spent $130. For the charging socket and the board to use at public chargers, I spent $80. Miscellaneous hardware like nuts and bolts, I spent $40. For the replacement gauges on the dash for my 12-volt monitoring and my GPS speedometer, I spent $30. And I swapped out the sketchy old spring-loaded potentiometer with a throttle pedal that was $60. The replacement motor I bought after the initial motor burnt up was $870. And I managed to sell a few old EV parts off the car for $40. So that's a total of $3,615 for just the EV conversion. Now, there were costs associated to the car itself that had nothing to do with the EV. That's why I'm breaking it up and not including that in the total. So as I said before, I split up the $2,000 I paid for the car originally. $1,000 was for EV parts, the other $1,000 was for the car itself. Then I had to spend $260 to get new tires. I spent $420 getting new seals and taillights. I spent $90 fixing the brakes and $25 fixing the speakers. These had nothing to do with the EV conversion, and that's a total of $1,795. Next section is the tools I bought. I'm not including this in the EV cost because in the business world, stuff like this would be amortized. For all the monitoring devices and boards and tools I bought to initially test the Tesla modules to make sure they were all good, I spent $210. Hydraulic crimping tool, I spent $40. And I got a chain lift for $40. So that's a total of $290. These are all things that I'll be able to use for future projects. And finally, mistakes that I made. I initially bought a BMS that wouldn't work. That was $320. I bought several things of hardware that I ended up not needing and wouldn't work either for $60. I made a mistake and broke a pin on my wiring and couldn't figure it out, and I had to have EVTV diagnose the BMS for me. That was $120. Then I broke a few switches and buttons while I was working on the car, and those were $60. So that's a total of $560 on mistakes I made that if I were to do this project, I wouldn't have again. So, adding it all up together, $3,615 for the EV, $1,795 for the car itself and maintaining an old vintage car, $290 for specialty tools, and $560 in mistakes. This project in total cost me $6,260. So I'm pretty happy with that overall. I have a very functional car with a 150-mile range. It's one-of-a-kind, unique car that I have a lot of fun driving, and it seems to turn heads everywhere I go. If you have any in-depth technical questions on any of the parts of the EV conversion, look out my playlist that I'm going to tag. There's tons of information. I have like over 30 videos out detailing all that, and you can find a lot of information there. Anyone who's considering doing this, I would encourage you to try it out. If you're mechanically inclined and have access to a lot of tools like a mill, lathe, welder, or electrical crimping tools,
You can do this project for pretty cost effectively like I have. And once you get started and enjoy what you're doing, you're going to be motivated enough to finish it just like I was. You'll definitely run into hurdles and get stalled at times, but take breaks, keep making progress, and it'll get done and you'll have something that you really love at the end.